as you said earlier with Mothman, maybe some people are misidentifying large birds like pelicans, but there have been accounts of them picking up children. I don't know if they could pick up an adult, and the reason I say that is that birds, even very large birds, are very lightweight. They have hollow bones. They don't have much weight and substance. So, for example, a large eagle can only pick up about half of its body weight, and a large eagle probably weighs about 15, maybe 25 pounds.
Well, I will say this: where I live down in Gig Harbor, Washington, we got a lot of eagles, a lot. And I watched when we first moved here. We had a cat. It probably weighed about maybe 8-10 pounds. And it was in our backyard, and an eagle just swooped down, and that cat was gone like that.
Yep, and there you go. That's the perfect size that an eagle would be looking for, something about a third of its body weight or something, but maybe half. But, yeah, very sad. But, yeah, it's possible. Now, what's interesting about the thunderbirds also is that the descriptions seem to match prehistoric birds known as teratorns. And the teratorns lived in North America up until the end of the Ice Age, about 10,000 years ago, the end of the Pleistocene. Many, many fossils have been found in the La Brea tar pits, throughout California, Nevada, Oregon, and even in the East. And these birds had a wingspan anywhere from 12 to 18 feet across on a very large species. And they looked very much like condors and eagles and vultures. They were related. So you have a candidate there to explain the thunderbirds if you consider the possibility that maybe some of these prehistoric birds may have survived their presumed extinction 10,000 years ago.
Yeah, that's a possibility. Now, because we only got like about 14 minutes left, do you want to talk about some of your books and stuff like that and where they can find them and what got you into writing books?
Well, early on, I've been interested in cryptozoology my whole life, ever since I was a little kid, so it's been a passion of mine, but I never planned on actually becoming a full-time researcher investigator. But many years ago, I met some people that were doing research out in the field and putting a lot of time into it, and they were kind of inspiring me. And then I met one of my heroes, who was an author, a guy named Loren Coleman, who's a leading cryptozoologist. And I asked him, how can I make a name for myself in this field? How can I get some attention and some momentum? And he suggested I write a book. So at that time, I was getting some Thunderbird accounts. I'd run across people that had claimed to seen these big birds in Texas, and so there aren't a lot of books that draw attention to that particular cryptid. So I wrote that book. That was in 2007. It was called Big Bird: Modern Sightings of Flying Monsters, and it covers the Thunderbird phenomenon throughout Texas and elsewhere. And then in 2010, I co-authored a book called Monsters of Texas with my good friend Nick Redfern, the leading author in the world of unexplained. And that one, of course, focuses mainly on our home state here in Texas, which has a variety of weird creatures, Bigfoot, the chupacabra, and thunderbirds, and other things. And then in 2013, I wrote the book I mentioned earlier, Encounters with Flying Humanoids, which is about Mothman and other similar creatures around the world. And in 2016, I wrote a book called A Menagerie of Mysterious Beasts, which is a really good, diverse book in terms of covering everything in the field of cryptozoology and really everything I've ever investigated through the years. And now my new book is called The Essential Guide to Bigfoot. It's brand new, and it's available on Amazon, or people can contact me if they want a signed copy. And it's a primer for people that are just getting into Bigfoot or maybe modestly interested in the topic, and they want the basic information. It's very accurate. It is the consensus opinion of researchers for over the last 50 years, the people that have put in the most time, and there's some theories and some of my research in there as well. So yeah, 5 books, and I do have an Amazon author page. If people click on there, they can see all the books.
Now, do you have a website, too?
I do. KenGerhard.com is my website. I also have, of course, a Facebook page, Ken Gerhard Cryptozoologist. I have a Twitter, The Real Ken Gerhard, and I have an Instagram, which is Gerhard @gerhard_Ken.
I bet you're busy just like me. I get so many emails each day from doing this show that, when I started this show 2 years ago, I could answer every email I get. Now it's like if I answered everybody, I'd be at it 8 hours a day replying to people. But yeah, I really am intrigued about what you do. Now, I know James has one question before we let you go here in about 10 minutes. James, go ahead and ask him.
Yeah, what's your take on the Dogman and the Bray Road? Are they similar? Are they different? Or what's your take on those two things, roughly?
Yeah, I think they're the same thing. I'm you guys have probably had guests, I'm assuming, that have discussed Dogman, but that's something that's really blown up in recent years. I personally put the Dogman, and just like the name implies, people are describing these giant bipedal canine-like animals, similar to Bigfoot, only that because they're very tall and walk on their hind legs a lot. But the witnesses always describe them as having a dog-like head, dog-like, wolf-like head with a muzzle and pointy ears. Some witnesses have described their legs as looking like very canine-like, with kind of bending backwards, and a lot of weirdness that goes on with the Dogman. I personally put it in the same category as Mothman. I think it's a similar phenomenon. The Beast of Bray Road was one of the first Dogmen that was ever publicized, and of course, my colleague and friend Linda Godfrey has written many books, but beginning in the early 1990s, when she was working as a reporter at a local newspaper up there in Elkhorn, Wisconsin, she started hearing about these sightings, and she learned that there was a local game warden had a file on werewolf sightings, and when that was kind of surfaced, that made big news, because you don't hear about government officials with werewolf files, real werewolf files. So yeah, and the descriptions are similar to the other Dogmen that have been described, what I just was talking about. Now, I actually organized the very first Dogman conference back in 2016. This was up in Defiance, Ohio, and we had about 165 people showed up, and several authors and investigators, and we talked about it. It's a really mind-blowing phenomenon, but it seems to be gaining popularity. And whatever this Dogman, Beast of Bray Road thing is, the accounts are now spreading all over the world. There are sightings in South America, Africa, Australia. So it seems to be, the Dogman seems to be proliferating all over the world. It's pretty amazing.
Now, did you have another question, James, or is that it?
No, I was just curious what his intake was on the Dogman enigma. Thank you very much, Ken.
No.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's supernatural. I mean, there's nothing, again, looking at traditional science and zoology, I mean, humans and canines, we diverged from a common ancestor like 55 million years ago or something, and we took drastically different evolutionary paths. We descended from primates, and canids descended from primitive carnivores, and so you're not going to have, what I'm trying to say is you're not going to have any possibility of a combination of features that we have and features that canids have. So, but it is interesting. There's a lot of argument over whether the Dogman is the same thing as a werewolf. In my mind, it is. I mean, the name werewolf is essentially just an older, were means man, and wolf and dog are pretty much interchangeable. And you have werewolf legends in various cultures that date back centuries. So maybe these things have been around for a while.
What is the most creepiest cryptic thing that you have run across?
Wow. Well, Mothman is pretty creepy. When I was doing some investigations up in Point Pleasant, we had all kinds of strange things happening. I don't really investigate a lot of the really, people talk about things like the Black-Eyed Kids and Slender Man. I don't really get into a lot of that stuff. The Wendigo, that's kind of too far out for me. So some of the flying humanoids have been pretty creepy. And also these quote-unquote lizard men and goat men, which, again, similar to the dog man, people describe these weird creatures that have like a mixture of human and animal features, and they're often said to lurk, in isolated areas, old stone bridges and railroad tracks by the woods and Lover's Lane areas, and They like to scare people, jump out of the woods and things. So some of those stories are pretty strange and very creepy.
They are. Loch Ness Monster, last week they started saying now they think they figured it out, that it's giant eels. What do you think about that one?
Well, it's a process of elimination, really, but there was an extensive study done by some university in New Zealand, and of course they took eDNA samples, water samples from all over the lake, and they analyzed hundreds of species to see what they could identify. And they were able to, they did not find evidently any DNA of anything prehistoric like a plesiosaur or an unknown reptile or anything like that. So, but they did find apparently a lot of eel DNA. Now that's not really a surprise because everyone's always known there were a lot of eels in Loch Ness. But there have been sightings of Nessie, and where people have described it as looking kind of like a big eel. The conger eel is native to the United Kingdom, and some of those conger eels can get 7 feet long or maybe longer, really monstrous sizes. So that's kind of where they're going with that. But it doesn't really match the physical descriptions on a whole, and that's kind of the point I'm always making. If you look at there's like over 1,000 Nessie sightings through the years, and the vast majority of those people describe these big whale-like humps that come out of the water that are 20 feet long, very smooth skin, usually dark color, and that's the most often Nessie sighting is that. So I don't think an eel could account for a big whale-like hump. I just don't see how that's possible.
Yeah, well, I looked at the famous pictures of the Loch Ness Monster, that's on the net, and no way an eel could, replicate that. I just, I think, what, the people are trying to come up with closure on some of this stuff. That's what it comes down to. Now, if somebody's out in the woods and they think they have found like Bigfoot prints or hair or something, what should they do?
Contact me.
Well, besides,
I'm always happy to, if you want to send me a picture or an account, or there are local research groups now. There are definitely Bigfoot organizations in every state, and they're easy to find online. They usually have seasoned investigators that are experienced, and there are also other groups too that now specialize in other cryptids, dogman and lake monsters, and you're really not, unfortunately, you're not going to get anywhere taking it to law enforcement or the media or a scientist. It's just the possibility that these things actually exist is just so unbelievable that most of those folks don't want to get involved. But there are people that are approaching this scientifically and looking at the evidence, such as myself, and there are a bunch of us out here. So.
Well, I would think if you had Bigfoot footprints that are fresh, couldn't you take a sample of the soil or the mud or whatever to where they could try a breakdown and see if there was any DNA? I don't see Bigfoot wearing shoes; they're barefooted. Yeah, they're leaving imprints.
No, that's a good. Yeah, that could happen. Or even the water samples. If you had footprints going down to the water, you could take a water sample there, and if it drank from the water, there would be some of its trace DNA in there. So you're right. The DNA evidence is moving along to the point where that could be the way that we prove some of these things. And I work with one particular geneticist, and I know there are some others that are kind of becoming interested, which is a good sign, because if we can get some scientists to DNA test some of these samples, maybe we'll find something unknown.
Yeah. Well, hey, Ken, I want to thank you coming on for the hour. I really appreciate you coming on Night Dreams. Again, if you want to give out your latest book, where they can find it, and your website here before I let you go, for people can, check you out and get a hold of you if they ran across one of these things.
Well, thank you for having me on, Gary. Great questions. Time flew by, but I really appreciate it. My website is kengerhard.com. I can also be found on all the social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And my new book is called The Essential Guide to Bigfoot, and it's available on Amazon.com. or if people want a signed copy, they can try to get in touch with me through social media, and I'm happy to send them a signed or autographed copy.
Great. Hey, Ken, if you ever